Hi, folks. My name is Chisom Udeze. I am the founder of Diversify, the organization behind this initiative. I am an economist and also a practitioner along the lines of belonging, justice, sustainability, and inclusion. I love all things numbers. I am Nigerian, grew up in the US, and also a naturalized Norwegian citizen. What else is there to share? I guess I'm really happy to be here today, and in describing myself, I am a Black woman. I am wearing a red lipstick, which is my signature color. I have my hair in long twists, and I am wearing a shirt, blue stripes. Behind me, my background is a bit blurred, but you might see the makings of a round mirror with black outer layer. Oh my gosh, I'm really fumbling this. And I have also you might see makings of a hanging bookshelf I have on the wall with some interesting books. So that's me. With that, I'm gonna call on Amma to introduce herself.
Thanks, Chisom. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amma Afrifa-Tchie. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Global Strategic Lead for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for NRC, which is the Norwegian Refugee Council. But my background and career has predominantly been in people, culture, engagement, DEI, and also a bit of HR. And I've worked in different industries as well as different sectors, and for small size companies scaling up to large corporates. I have short brown hair. Well, actually, it depends on how the sun hits it, but today it's brown. Short brown hair, a little wavy. I'm wearing black glasses. I am a Black woman. I am Ghanaian, but I also have British citizenship. I am currently in Oslo. My background is blurred. I'm also wearing a African print, which is a blue, I think blue, white, and gray kind of print design. And I'm wearing a silver brooch. I think my background is blurred, so you can't see it, but it's got some lighting and a chair that you can ultimately almost see. And that's me. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks. I think this is always a test of who's a descriptive thinker and who's not. Like, obviously, today it's not working out. I will not win any points. Thanks, Amma. Okay, next I'm gonna call in Astrid.
Hi, everyone. My name's Astrid Sundberg. Just for the self-description part, I'm wearing a black and white stripy polo neck jumper. I'm a white woman with freshly washed hair, freshly washed kind of blondish hair. Oh, it's so hard, isn't it, doing the self-descriptor? I'm wearing glasses. I've got a blurred background, so you can't see the extremely messy office that I'm live streaming from today. I'm a Scandi Brit. I just turned 50 this year, so I'm officially a queenager. And I'm a director, I'm a board advisor, a speaker, and a leader from the startup and scale-up climate. I have a particular passion for inclusive leadership, workplace well-being. I've previously held the role of global director for diversity and inclusion at Norway's first unicorn company, Udeze. And prior to that, I also worked at Shortcut, which is how I know Sophia. More on that later. I'm presently working as Director of Impact Partnerships at the Conduit, a newly established community in Oslo for people interested in scaling solutions to social sustainability challenges. And I'm a long-term supporter of the Diversity and Inclusion in the Workplace series. Delighted to be back here today for, I think, my 8th or 9th session, which is going to be jam-packed with some really good thematics. So thank you for having me, and I'm really looking forward to today.
Thanks for being back, Astrid. Charlotte, you're up.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be here today, and thank you very much to Diversify and HerSpace for having me. I'm not up at 8 yet. I think this is my second, but really delighted to be back. So my name is Charlotte Beering. I am calling in from Iceland today. I am a white woman who has British and Icelandic heritage. I am wearing heavy tortoiseshell glasses, which is my kind of go-to look, and my favorite headband, which is leopard print with lots of jewels all over it. And I'm wearing a white shirt and a dark blue velvet pinafore. I'm sitting in my basement office, and it is blurred because in the background there are pipes and electricity meters and some old phone wires sticking out, which I would like to remove, but apparently it belongs to the council, so I can't touch them. So one day my office will be prettier, but for now it's not. So I am currently working for an Icelandic multinational. It's a manufacturing company. I'm the head of diversity and inclusion. It was a new role that was created at the same time I joined. And so that's been an interesting journey for the last 3 years. I've now taken on the additional responsibility of well-being, mental health, and health. So it's keeping me very busy. Prior to working at Morale in Iceland, I worked for 8 years for a professional services company as a management consultant and also in the gender equality space. So I have worked in a lot of companies and also for a lot of companies as a consultant. And before I joined EY, I was trying to work out what I wanted to do. So I dabbled a lot in a lot of different roles, but spent time with huge institutions like the United Nations and the Red Cross. So have quite a broad understanding of different types of businesses. I've lived in 9 different countries. I've worked in lots more. So I always struggle with the question, where are you from? But yes, that's me today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks for being here. Stine, I'm going to come to you.
Hi, everyone. Well, this is my first time at being at the webinar, and it's actually my first time on many things. Also describing myself. I've never done that before. So I'm just listening in on how you guys are doing it. Well, I'm a woman, brown, black-ish. I'm a mixed race. I mean, if you'd like to call me black or brown, is either one. I'm Norwegian heritage. I am wearing a white blouse for the occasion, and it's also the first time actually that I'm wearing glasses, because I'm getting in that age where I actually need computer glasses. So this is the first for me, and I'm find that myself looking kind of weird looking at myself. But I'm sitting at this office, my home office, which is blurred. What more to say? Well, I'm a sustainability leader, former sustainability director at the Soprasteria, and I'm looking forward to a very exciting new position in August, but that's still kind of a secret, but it will be working within sustainability and the digital sphere. I'm also a certified diversity trainer, a leader, so I've been through all of that, and I'm also a diversity advocate. I'm also politically engaged in the party Venstre, and I sit on many different boards, and thanks to actually Diversify, I'm also now at the board of Oslo Inclusive, which is a great organization creating social spaces for all around in Oslo. So I guess that's me. I'm very happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, and great place to launch the glasses, and you look great. So. Okay, and lastly, I come to Sophie. You and I are the only people not wearing glasses today, like with the speakers, so we're minority here. So hello, hi Sophie.
Hi, I could have wear them, but I chose not to today. But anyways, my name is Sophie Stoll. I currently work as a UX lead in Innovation Norway. I was recently known for sharing my story in some of the biggest newspapers in Norway about my workplace harassment at Shortcut, where I used to work with Astrid many years ago. I am wearing a knitted sweater. I'm Norwegian, so my skin is matching my pink office, I would say, or sewing place. My background is not blurred, and you can see some fabrics in the back because I also use this place for sewing, which is my passion. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being here. All right, folks, thanks for that. And for everyone listening to us here or online, LinkedIn, we just wanted you to see who and hear who's in the room. And now we're just going to jump right into things. So this topic came about after a couple of discussions with women in my life and also my team in trying to explore the current and ongoing challenge people in general are facing in the workplace. I want to preface this conversation by saying we are absolutely aware that this panel could have more gender representation. Before this particular conversation, we thought it was ideal to just have a conversation with women, and then part 2, part 3, we would want to bring on other voices. So the topic today is toxic workplaces, leadership, and mental health. And what do they essentially have to do with each other? So just to dive right in, given this topic, I want to call in each speaker to very briefly share what comes up for you when you hear this topic. So I'm going to start with Astrid. What is coming up for you?
Yeah, thank you, Chisom. When I think of toxic workplaces, and I think of what shows up for me personally on a personal level, what shows up for me is harrowing experiences, several, multiple in a 28-year career history. It includes sexual harassment, it includes bullying, it includes many unpleasant experiences. When I allow my brain to go back to that place, the flashbacks for me are fear, anxiety, knot in my stomach, feeling afraid to go into work, insomnia, sleepless nights, dreaming about work, dreaming about the fearful things that are happening, gaslighting, shattered self-esteem, a lot of quite harrowing thoughts, actually. That's what shows up for me on a personal level.
Thanks for sharing, Astrid. Stine, I'm going to come to you.
Well, I'm thinking more on a sort of a macro level is what comes up for me. And what comes up is really that the workplace is such an important, place for us as human beings. Like the workplace is really a place where we do get a lot of our intrinsic needs met. It's the needs for food, shelter, getting bills paid. It's a need for belonging. It's the need for feeling included, feeling that you're contributing to society, that you're worth something, and that you're respected. And so it's really additionally, when you were posting that 81% of the American employees report how stress affect their mental at the workplace, affect their mental health, just as Astrid just was explaining and showing. It's not really a big surprise, but it's more the reason to really take this seriously, and that really workplaces, leaders, and employees really should take even more social responsibility for our fellow human beings and colleagues, human beings, and the well-being at the workplace. It's like we're so concerned with bullying going on at the school and for our kids, but the fact that bullying also occurs at large scale at work, that's an issue that we're more hesitant to touch. And why is that? Why is that? Can it be something to do with the fact that we're also intrinsically involved and intertwined with the workplace? We all have needs. We all are dependent on the workplace in maybe more ways that we are even aware of ourselves. So I think it's really important that we do talk about these issues, even though we might feel it's dangerous for us to talk about it, because we fear being ostracized, we fear of letting go of all the things that we're dependent on. And also, I think it's really interesting to reflect upon the outpour of all these incidents that we're not seeing in the media and that we hear about. And it's really like, we can reflect on, is that because it's happening so much now? Or is it really another reason why people are talking about it? And basically, I have a theory, or I believe that, you know, we should be aware of the fact that, you know, many workplaces and top leadership groups have historically and are still very dominated by masculine power cultures, and that has traditionally not been inducive to sharing expectations. And now that we're seeing a lot of more diverse leadership groups and diverse leaders coming up, these people, these female leaders, or or not so conformative leaders, do not want to be silenced. They do not want to put a lid on it. They do not want to just go on like nothing else has happened, but they do want to share. They want to heal. They want to understand what happened. And this is something that we're seeing happen. This is why it's so important that we do have these conversations, and that people like Sophia and others talk about what, and Astrid and everyone, that we talk about what's going on.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. So a lot of things are coming up. We see the personal aspect, we see the macro aspect. So Sophie, I'm going to come to you. What is coming up for you with this topic?
Well, a lot of the same things, definitely harassment, bullying, also a lot of secrecy, and a lot of things that shouldn't be a secret is probably part of fear culture, I guess. Poor leadership that results in a bad environment, and that also not creates, but at least makes it easier for other colleagues also to not be the best version of themselves, which just makes the bullying be able to go on and on. Also, a lot of the same things that Astrid said about it affects a huge part of your life, just being afraid of going to work and not looking forward to work, which you should most of the time, because it's such a huge part of your life. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. So I also hear a new thing that was added there in terms of enablement. So how poor leadership can also either enable bad behavior or enable or reinforce good behavior. And that leads to a workplace where people have a sound mental health and they feel well. All right. So then two more was coming up. Amma, what's coming up for you?
Pretty much the same, but I guess if I was to round it up in words, because I don't want to repeat stuff, it's definitely workplace culture, assumed and expected behaviors, and also boundaries, as well as the lived experience within that. And then also systems and processes and procedures that either enable, hinder, or exacerbate the situations. In a nutshell, I mean, I'm not going to repeat what everyone said, but it's because I concur with everybody else. But to add to that, those are the other things I'd say.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. Systems, structures, boundaries. Love it. And we're going to unpack further. Charlotte, coming to you lastly.
Yeah, the best thing about being last is everyone has said all the good things. So I agreed with a lot of what people were saying. What came up for me that hasn't been said is, and this is again at the macro level, is there's such a huge disconnect, and it's so counterproductive for businesses. I don't think it seems that so many businesses don't understand the impact that a toxic workplace has. They focus on finances, they focus on all these other things, and they leave the people out. And so how most businesses have been built is, it's back to what Amma was saying about the systemic part of it, is businesses don't help the culture become good, become less toxic. And so you have this perpetuation of toxic cultures, which is completely counterproductive in the long term to what the business's outcomes are. But yeah, I think everything else people have covered already.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So I think what we have lifted so far is when we talk about toxic workplace, what comes up. So I do want to take on different bits of the topics and then bring them all together. So first, I want to talk about mental health, right? We see that research says that quite about 70% of people say that their managers have more impact on their mental health than their therapists, than their partners. And that is a staggering percentage of people in the workplace who are either going to be positively or negatively impacted by the spaces in which they engage. And I think as adults, we spend a significant part of our adult life, for those who are working in traditional workplaces, at the workplace, right? So that's a huge portion. Oftentimes when we talk about things like mental health, productivity, I think it's the old ways to compartmentalize that you're at work. When you're at work, we don't engage with things like this. You know, mental health is for yourself afterwards. But it's really difficult to separate the two because work translates into real life. So with that, I do want to ask a question about mental health. When we're talking about mental health and its relationship to workplace productivity, to workplace growth, to innovation, and to general well-being, it's quite important that we also amplify effort to solidify good workplace and general mental health, and also minimize the stigma that also comes from saying, I am not doing well. I'm having anxiety right now within the workplace. So with that, I want to ask Amma, how can we demystify the stigma with mental health in the workplace?
I think before I talk about how we can do that, I think there's also something around, well, what are the signs of a toxic workplace in the first place, which we've kind of discussed in what it looks like. You know, so it's about thinking around, okay, how does this show up in the workplace, first of all? And it's like, you know, when you have no room to make mistakes. We've mentioned lack of trust, you know, excess stress, gaslighting, which Astrid mentioned, you know, even simple as office gossip, which happens too often, far too much, you know, low morale, high turnover, and all that stuff. So these are signs that show you that the workplace is very toxic. To then have to have the question around, okay, well, what is it that is creating these signs, so to speak, within the workplace, and how do we then address it? You know, how do we stop our employees from feeling unsafe or have that fear of reprimand and rejection, as Sophie mentioned? And it's around remembering, to Charlotte's point, that people are what run the business. Without people, your businesses and organizations won't run. So there's a definite duty of care and understanding about how do we unpack and unpick this. And it's by creating the environments where it's fine to speak about mental health and well-being. So by that, it's around prioritizing well-being in the sense of education and actually making sure people understand what does mental health being and mental health conditions look like from a mental health and well-being literacy perspective. You know, investing time in that. And that might look like things like, you know, educational sessions, raising awareness, but equally it's around how you offer that support. So thinking about how you are supporting your employees at the moment and what is currently working, you know, putting your employees first, about understanding and learning what your employees' needs are, and then talking about it. Like I said, creating these safe spaces where people can actually have honest conversations, but bringing those conversations into the real space where it actually happens, because you can't have little hubs where things are just happening in there and it's actually not changing the behaviors of an actual organization. I think there's also things I mentioned stuff already about prioritizing well-being, but I think that is very much also around how do you have your well-being conversations in the first place? You know, do you have communities within the workplace, whether it's a mental health first aider or, you know, an ERG group, which is an employee resource group that looks at mental health and well-being? You know, are you actually upskilling the people who are responsible for looking after people to understand their own mental health and well-being, as well as how you support teams around it and how you support individuals to want to talk about it? Again, the key thing is the focus being on the employees. and looking at the inclusive needs that are needed for the options for people to want to choose and how to choose to disclose whether they have a mental health or well-being problem. A lot of things is also about role modeling. So again, how we role modeling inclusive behaviors from the top, so not just at senior leadership and management, but also with co-workers. But I think for me, it is thinking about, and you'd have heard me talk about this before, it's thinking about the employee life cycle experience from start to finish. When someone enters your organizations to when they leave, what is the experiences they're having, and how are you capturing that? And how are you making sure that you are changing cultures by people knowing what is expected behavior and what will be tolerated and what will not be tolerated? So not just looking at your policies, but how you bring those policies to life. Looking at your procedures and processes, do they actually work and are they fit for purpose? Looking at your support mechanisms that you have, your benefits, all that kind of stuff, and really looking at it from the lens of the employee as a diverse way as you can as possible. But it first starts with education and learning and improving literacy around that.
Thanks a lot. Charlotte, you recently tagged on an additional role on well-being at Morale. So with this topic on mental health, what is coming up for you? How can we bridge the stigma? You're on mute.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what Amma was saying, and one thing that we've been talking about a lot is differentiating between mental health, mental illness, and mental well-being, and there is a tendency to get these all confused. And I'm not going to go into the definitions now, but I think it's important that organizations are aware of the differences between these things and what their responsibility is and for their employees, but then also what are the employees' responsibilities for themselves, and how do we create a space where employees can build resilience around their mental health and mental well-being, and what are the support mechanisms in place to deal with things like poor mental health and mental illness. Psychological safety is obviously another thing that we're talking about a huge amount, because it's all very well having nice policies around these things, but if people don't feel comfortable coming forwards to talk to, whether it's their managers or to leaders, about issues that they're facing, and we are all at some, I can't remember the statistic off the top of my head, but it's well over 50% of people in any given year will have some mental health issue, and that is either exacerbated or brought on by their workplace. So organizations really need to be on this, because the cost of sorry, I just saw your comment coming through, Amma, and yeah, we need to be aware of the language we use when talking about mental health, illness, and well-being, and I think that's spot on. And it's, as Chisom said, it's a new responsibility for me, so it's still something that I'm getting my head around, and especially when you're working with organizations that have multiple languages, you see a lot of cross communication there as well. But it's how do organizations ensure that when people have the courage to be open about their mental health challenges or mental illnesses, how is that supported by the business? And it's not just about how it's supported behind closed doors, but people will talk about these things, and so there also needs to be a sort of visible response to it from the organization at large.
Thanks, Charlotte. You talked about psychological safety, and that also resonates for me as something that is so important within the workplace, and at the same time a word that has become very buzzy and is often misused, right? Because there's a lot of talk around psychological safety, but the actions to actually make people feel psychologically safe seems non-existent within the workplace. And I think this is something that has to be further unpacked, like in terms of what systems and processes do we have in place. Stina, I'm going to come to you. So you've been a leader at companies over the past decade plus. When you engage with the topic around mental health from that leadership perspective, what is important to do right and what is not good to do?
Well, I think both Amma and Charlotte has touched on the key things here, but I could sort of add on some of that. And I think just as like you said, ensuring that that the top leadership knows or understands the link between productivity, growth, innovation, general well-being, how that if that flourishes in good work environment, then I mean, if mental health and well-being flourishes, then creativity, innovation, and so on flourishes. And the opposite is true for toxic workplaces. Toxic workplaces, they have a tendency to self-destruct in many ways, but it can take a long time, and it's not good for business. So top leadership needs to be aware and see the link between mental health, especially today when we're working with knowledge workers. We're working with really, really competent knowledge and people that's they take a lot more education today than what they did when my father was taking education. The education levels are rising, and so actually people are getting also more aware of how their workplace influence their mental health. And I think basically like you guys said, focusing on how engaging the top leadership group to understand how that link is really important, and how their employees today have different expectations to the top leadership group. They expect to flourish at the workplace, and that will make also the company more revenue generating and flourish more. So basically, I think, like you guys said, one practical way to do that also would be to encourage people to talk openly about mental health issues, as you guys said, and to show that that's safe, it's welcomed, and you might even get praise for doing so. And the higher up you are up on the leadership roles, the more impact it might do, because people see that, okay, if that high-level executive can do it, then it must be a safe place to be. It was a man from Veidekke, director for strategy, I think, who openly went out and told the public he has clinically depression. And I think that opened a lot of doors and created a lot of space for many people. So, and just on another note, yesterday was actually Menstrual Hygiene Day, which I never heard about before. And, just growing up, that was just such a taboo talking about, for young girls. And it's really great now that, my daughter and others can grow up not having shame about, their bodily, how their body works. And so I think that's social progress in practice, and talking about that. And these things are social progress in practice. We're actually bringing the world forward by talking about these things.
Absolutely. I mean, these things are happening, and we can't put our heads in the sand and pretend like they are not. And I think for a lot of these topics that we're engaging on, ignorance is almost not acceptable, because yes, we know better. And as leaders, then we have to also have that responsibility to know and continually educate ourselves. So we're getting to the meat of things. I want to also say to those of the people who are here with us, we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? What is coming up for you? Do you have any questions, comments? Just checking that you all are still here with us, those on Zoom and those online. Astrid, I'm going to come to you, and then I have a different question for Sophie. So in terms of mental health, what is coming up for you within this topic, this particular question?
Yeah, so one of the things that comes up to me, it relates to the advocacy work that I do in this space. So I've been providing advisory and mentoring work to people that have suffered. It's predominantly women and sexual harassment in the workplace, but it's also sometimes lends itself to bullying and harassment. And I've also worked in HR as well, so I've been on the receiving end of handling cases. So I think that what my mentees speak to is experiences that are rife with not just sexual harassment or microaggressions, but dealing with racism in the workplace, having to deal with ableism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia has come up as well. Some pretty grave subjects beyond the sort of burnout, stress, mental health related elements. So we are talking about discrimination in many cases. And something else that comes up, because a huge focus for this is the perpetrators of the bad behaviors, oftentimes leaders, but not always leaders. But it is oftentimes, I think, a leadership issue. And what I see a lot is autocratic, dictatorial leadership styles, command and control style leadership, where there's a lot of power being owned and misused. And I think that it's never surprising to me, but it's always quite shocking, disheartening, and disappointing. But just something else that I want to nuance here, Chisom, which is related to this, is that because you mentioned misappropriation of words, and I'm just going to sort of also highlight that around the word toxic, because there are some discussions around toxic workplaces as being a sort of a frivolous application of the word toxic. When you think about it, you know, perhaps differences in the global north, where we many of us work in these nicer sort of corporate workplaces. I think it's important to remember that the phrase toxic workplace initially had a literal meaning that was applied to workplaces where actual toxins such as carcinogenic chemicals and things like that were used, asbestos, for example. So I think that we also need to consider the word toxic, that it doesn't become toxic, because it's a very social media buzzy word. And while we're using the word toxic to describe certain things in this very privileged part of the world that we're in, that can show up very differently for other people who literally are doing jobs where they risk their lives. So that's just also something that that comes up for me, Chisom.
Thanks for sharing, Astrid. Sophie, I'm going to come to you, and then Charlotte. Sophie, so one of the things that's come up in this conversation today is we need to talk. You know, we need to talk about the elephant in the room. We need to share things when they happen. We can no longer just hold it in. And you have been a quite remarkable example of that with your experience at Shortcut, which is the place you used to work. And you have essentially detailed, you know, this horrific experience you had. And as a result, you've also given voice to the struggles that many continue to face to this day. You know, when things like this happen, some of the things that's common that you hear from people is like, oh my gosh, this is still happening. Of course, it's still happening. It's always been happening, right? And so my question is for you, in engaging with this conversation, to whatever degree you feel comfortable sharing, what are some of your reflections about the taboo related to addressing them? And what did it feel like to finally exhale by talking about it?
Well, it makes part of the conversation has been about innovation and then fear culture. And I have personally experienced how it feels being under fear culture and kind of microaggressions, I would maybe call it. It's not, or at least for me, it was a big thing that happened, and that led to being harassed, and then that leading to microaggressions over time. It kind of builds you down, and I started to fear a lot, and also it was very difficult to believe in myself over it took some years, but then eventually you don't believe in yourself, and that just leads to not delivering good work. and that costs. So I think it's a weird way to handle anything. You would probably think that you want your employees to deliver the best. So not being able to delivering my best, being silenced, it just makes you feel kind of miserable and not worthy of anything. And maybe that's also why so many people that have experienced the same thing as me, because at least in my story, it's not just me, it's several other women, and it is several other men also that have experienced horrible things at the same workplace. But when you don't believe in yourself, you just don't think that you should share, I guess. So what helped for me was when I left, I had a plan to get back to be better. And I have been thinking a lot of times that I could just, if I was really lucky with my new workplace in Innovation Norway, and I got so much support, and I got to see what a really good workplace could look like. And then after some time, I started to gaining some strength back and believing in myself and my work. And then eventually I had enough strength and courage to share. But I also think maybe not everyone is as lucky as I am, so they don't share. And so thinking that, oh my God, is this still happening? Well, yes, of course, because nothing have happened to not make it still being a thing with harassment and bullying. It's not something people just stop with because it's 2024. So yeah, but it definitely affects mental health and the ability to deliver at work, which again affects the company. So yeah. Was there another question? I'm not sure if I answered all of it.
Well, I think you answered it. Thanks a lot for sharing. It's a bit numbing to think of you as lucky with what you've gone through, and then and I also know that or I will presume that in also voicing your experience, you weren't met with roses and honey on the street, right? Like that also has an additional baggage. And yet it is also true that you are one of the lucky ones, so to say, because there are some people for whom this is a more horrific, if this can even be more horrific experience. So thank you for sharing. I think you've given a lot of voice to so many people who are suffering in silence, and at least giving people the confidence to know that this is not okay, this is not normal. If you can't do anything about it right now, if it is within your privilege, you can leave, right? Because this is not normal.
Exactly. And also I like to say that I'm not sure if I would recommend everyone to just do that, because it is really scary. And I've had a lot of sleepless nights, and like just having my address on Google is not fun. I've been very scared because it is a lot of wealthy, privileged men that I'm standing up against. So I'm not sure if this is always the right way to do it. But for me, like in the end, I had to talk to someone, and then I was lucky that I had some very good journalists that would write the story. So maybe there is like talking more about this, maybe will help, maybe it will be a change. I hope that.
Thanks a lot. Charlotte, you had something to contribute? We can't hear you, you're still mute.
Sorry, I took my hand down and not the mute off. Thanks again, Sophie, for sharing. I think it's really important. The point I wanted to make was just off the back of something that Stina had said around people sharing their stories. And I've seen this done well, and I've seen it done badly. And there's a real importance of doing it authentically, because when a leader shares something around their mental health journey, if it's an authentic thing that they have really gone through a struggle, then that can really help other people. But I've seen what's happened a lot is people trying to talk about, and this also goes for diversity and inclusion, talking about when they felt excluded, and it falls very flat when people are sort of piggybacking on something that's really popular at the time, talking about how stressed they are. I saw it a lot during COVID with senior leaders talking about how hard things were when they were dialing in from their second house in a hot country, when and so there's a huge amount of privilege that comes with being a leader. And so sometimes talking about mental health challenges or mental illness as a leader is very different from someone who's more junior in the business. So I think it has to be done very, very carefully when we're asking leaders to share their stories, to make people come forward. Because if we're supporting, if a senior leader comes forward and talks about their struggles, and doesn't acknowledge the fact that they have a huge amount of privilege around the support that they have in order to deal with those issues, and they don't offer the same support to more junior people in the business, then I think it's counterproductive.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing. And I think something else coming up for me right now is that we also have to nuance that even further, because there are a lot of leaders who do not get support. There are senior leaders at companies who have different intersectional identities that are set up essentially to fail. So there's also that conversation, and I want to have that a bit later on, because we also see research showing that leaders, and especially leaders of small companies or founders of startups, there was a survey where every single person that was surveyed said they were struggling in some capacity with their mental health. And I know that for me as a leader in the different spaces where I have power, I also struggle. And oftentimes as a leader, you're not seen as a human being. You're just supposed to perform, and you're just supposed to have everything figured out, that no one actually cares for you. So I think that nuance, we also have to bring in. So thank you for sharing, and we'll talk more about this in a bit. Looking at the time, I have a lot of questions left, so I'm going to just jump right into it and try to keep our answers brief so we can cover as much as possible. So some of us, or if not most of us here, have been younger employees at some point, or junior employees at some point, and leaders currently, and we've been involved in leadership development or policy making. So in reflecting back, because I'm a big believer in, it's so easy to point fingers and say, this is what people are doing wrong, this is what people are not doing correctly. In reflecting back, so anyone who feels comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear maybe some specific examples or reflections that you have where you have failed to rectify a situation or call out or address toxicity, be it in yourself or in people for whom you have mandates over. And with that, I'm going to just call on to some people, let's say Amma. Specific examples? Something you could have done better?
I think given my role, I'm always having to think of what can I do better, just because I think I'm always put in a position in my role, which is whether it's been culture or in DEI, it's always having to think about the other person and being more self-aware. So I think for me, it is always around how can I always make sure that that person or the people involved, whether it's, have the right support they needed and I felt heard. So I think it's an interesting question to add, but I think just to shorten things up, I think it is always very much around just making sure that everybody has felt heard, but also managing expectations. There's an element sometimes where we feel like we always have to think that we have to solve for something, and in trying to solve for it, we actually create more deterioration, for a better word. So I think for me, in my career as a leader now and probably before, I think it's very much around showing up when it's needed, but also making sure that people are feeling heard, but also taking that learning example and trying to learn from that in other ways, because no situation is the same. And mental health and well-being is on a spectrum as well as the recovery. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's
what resonates for me is never getting into that point of, well, like a better word, arrogance, where you think you know it all, you've seen it all, and oh, you've done this before, you've heard this before, and then you have that one-size-fits-all approach to your leadership style. So that also resonates for me. You can always learn something even when you think you know it. So thanks for sharing. Astrid, I'm going to come to you if you can briefly share.
Yeah, I mean, so many reflections, not just in personal experiences as a younger person, but also as a leader. I mean, I was the chief HR officer at Shortcut for 4 years. So of course I have many reflections during numerous conversations where I think Sophia and I on numerous occasions have both sat feeling very safe together in our trauma, but also realizing afterwards or wondering, was there more I could have done? You know, did I do enough? You know, of course, those kind of reflections are important. But I think another really important reflection, Chisom, is you know, there's no Erin Brockovich moment in calling things out. It isn't as easy. It's not like a movie. It's not like we can just go knocking on a door and have a conversation. When we're in toxic workplaces where the leadership is very problematic and very toxic, those places are really hard to call out that kind of behavior. So for any leaders or HR managers or people tuning in today that have the want and the will to do that, but don't have the parameters to do it, I really feel for you. I feel for you, because that's not an easy situation to be in, to sort of navigate those boundaries. And, you know, I think sometimes there is an assertion that I've seen some leaders saying, well, we've got the reporting procedures. We've got, you know, you can just put it in the anonymous reporting. Even that isn't easy. I mean, we need to stop talking about reporting things as if it is easy. What Sophia did was incredibly brave, but for numerous people, it's a no-go. Some people are, especially the work I've done with people from immigrant communities who've sometimes taken years to get a job and then go on to experience racism. Are they likely to then go and report that after they've spent so long to get a job that their visa is dependent on? So I think navigating power structures has been so absolutely mind-blowingly confusing for me. And I think that that's what all the leaders who are on the right side of this, the leaders who want to make a change or call out behavior or be supportive, I think that that's the eternal conundrum. And one last thing I'll say is I think I'm always looking at the memes that are trending on Instagram. You know, I might be a queenager, but I'd like to see. And I think that there was one going around about something around just leave a workplace if it's toxic. You know, I think that's quite responsible and quite loaded with privilege, because many people don't have the opportunity to just leave a workplace. And I think that that's sort of that's sort of labeling of the issue, that it's just as simple as get another job. I mean, of course, that is advice that we all give to friends or that I will give to people, but it isn't always that easy for some people. So I think that nuance is important. You know, we know that having a good boss can literally change your life, and having a bad boss can literally ruin it. But navigating the bits in between, it's not like a movie. It's not like you can just leave and move on into the distance to start a new chapter. There are many complications and many struggles and systems and structures to navigate.
Thanks for sharing, Astrid. I saw is it a meme? One of those things about the best time to do something if you're in a role of responsibility or if you have the power to say something is when it's happening. The next best time is right now. And sometimes right now is 4 years later, right? Right now is, and that is what is also important, is we can say something, that validation, that affirmation still matters. Stine, I want to come to you quickly, and then Charlotte. In terms of this question on leadership, where do you see that in just reflecting on your own process? What have you seen that you could have done right or could have improved? Or it could be your particular experience or something that happened around you, if you have any to share.
Yes, just reflecting on Sophie and Astrid's just comments here. I remember being very young, and from many years ago, I remember calling out wrongdoings by a top leader. And I remember like this leader had like a really harassing behavior. And what happened was the top leadership group will said, well, if he's harassing employees, then the employees and the leader, they need to talk things out. They need to settle this, you know? And basically the leadership groups was in, you know, they were in his own partnership, you know, so they didn't want to touch the subject. And so they said, well, you just, the guys just need to sort this out yourself. While in reality, that leader needed to get known and hear that that type of behavior wasn't acceptable. Not from us to sort of hash things out. That was not the way to do it. So basically it put me in a really, really uncomfortable situation, and the toxic leader got to continue his toxic behavior. And so what did that really teach me? Well, it taught me that, you know, that was not a smart thing to do. You know, it really gave me got me in a lot of trouble and uncomfortable situations. And so reflecting back on that, you know, it's, but it was the right thing to do. But, you know, reflecting back on it, you know, it makes me think that, you know, when you're really young to the workplace in your younger years, you get really sort of, or at least I got really shocked and outraged of a toxic behavior. And then when you've been around the block a couple of times, you've seen different things, you were witness of different experiences, you see, oh, well, this is kind of common. This is happening all over in many different places and different settings. And I guess a lot of people, what they get is sort of the Stockholm syndrome in a way, just get on with it to kind of save their own skin and just, you know, as you guys were talking about, not having the privilege to say, well, this is not good, I'm just going to quit and I'm just going to start something else. You know, it's not that easy. And so I think, you know, recognizing these behaviors is really, and being socially responsible is really, really key. And as you, Astrid, and as you guys were talking about, you know, now is the right time, or then was the right time. You know, if you're in a position, if you're in a situation where you're currently combating these things, it's not always easy to do the right thing in an environment that's totally wrong, you know. So I think sometimes the right time could be now and later when you reflected on things. My advice would always be, you know, do what's right for you. You know, do not necessarily do the right thing, because there might not be a right thing when everything is toxic around you. So you have to listen to yourself and take really good care of yourself as well. Yeah, that's basically what comes up for me, is that, you know, as we said, you know, what Sophie's doing and what you did, I really want, you know, to recognize that it's really important work, and it's not just for yourself but for others as well, you know. So we really need to empower these bold voices to come forward and create space for all of us.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Stine. Sophie, I want to come to you. So earlier, Amma had talked about the duty of care. In this conversation so far, we've talked about leaders. And so just segueing from that onto this question I asked about reflecting on what can be done better, what you potentially could have done differently. I also want to attach that to the question of individual responsibility for their own mental health. So the question then would be, what reflection do you have in what you might have done differently? And also, what is the duty of care of individuals in taking care of their own mental health?
Yeah, I have two reflections, and one thing I could have done better is first, for myself, not thinking that I can fix things. I worked somewhere where I was afraid of not only myself and my mental well-being at work, but also people around me, and wanting to stay to try to fix things. I did that for years, and it took a lot of time realizing it's not my job to fix what's not working really well. it is always the leader's responsibility. So for my own sake, I wish I left before, because I was very privileged I did have an opportunity to leave, but I didn't. I wanted to fix things. So just realizing and learning after that I didn't, or it wasn't my job to fix everyone else's problems. I think I really learned that the hard way. And another thing that I really wish I did differently was not to contributing to gossip and the culture that I was a part of, because I was, of course, not the first person experiencing harassment or bullying or all the things I experienced. There were several people before me that I know of, and a lot of other people that have been that I knew. Now, after sharing this story, I've been in contact with a lot of other people that has been put through the same experiences. But what I am a bit ashamed of is that I was also a part of gossiping about people at work, like, oh, did you see her and him together again at that party? Or just, it was just a part of the culture talking about others, and I wish I was better than that. And I've learned now, being at a place, I've never heard any gossip, and it's been 1.5 years now. And it just is very different, and in a really good way, because I think it affects my mental health a lot, because when I'm not in a negative space, which gossiping will put you in, then I just have a much better life in general.
Thanks a lot for sharing. And I think it's always humbling, you know, when people kind of, like, hindsight is always 20/20, but to even be able to voice that takes a lot of courage and bravery. So thank you. Charlotte, I'm going to come to you. There's a comment here by Randy, and it was a comment about, I'm going to just quickly read it out. I do question how much management speaking out on their mental health struggles signals that it is safe to share across the organization. They say that instead, they think it signals that the top leaders feel comfortable and safe enough to speak openly because of their position of power. So this bringing that power perspective into play. Because yes, it is true that as a leader, I might come and say, yo, I'm struggling, but then other people within my organization don't feel like they can do the same, especially if I'm running a toxic ship, right? So my question for you, Charlotte, segueing off this, is what systems should actually be in place to make sure that individuals feel safe to share without repercussions, and that it would actually be followed up?
Yeah, and I saw the point that Randy made, and that was sort of what I was trying to get at earlier. And then in response to the question, Chisom, that you posed, I'll be completely honest, I don't actually know exactly what the answer is yet. It's something I'm working on, and if there's anyone here who has seen it done really well, please let me know, because it is around looking for best practices. What I'm working on at the moment is how do we create these structures in order for people to be able to come forward about mental health concerns or any concerns, whether it's bullying, whether it's any kind of discrimination. In the multiple conversations I've been having across our business in recent weeks, it seems that there's not a one size fits all, and a lot of it is very dependent on, you know, which country you're based in, who your manager is, which is the HR person. And so you could be really lucky, and that your manager is really supportive, and that the HR person for your function is really supportive, and then it gets dealt with in a really good way. And so what I'm trying to do is understand who is doing it really well at the moment, and then create a sort of framework or a sort of best practice around it, so each country can, because again, another realization, and I've seen quite a few things pop up about how things differentiate between Norway and Norway, Sweden, I can't remember what other countries, we operate in 33 countries and the laws vary wildly. And so what will work in Iceland or Denmark will not work in the US. So it's trying to have a sort of global minimum standard that then each country can interpret, so that there is some sort of structure and something written down so everyone follows a sort of similar process with some degree of flexibility in it. But I can see Amma, and I'm excited to hear what she has to say, because maybe she has the answer that I've been looking for.
I do not.
I think you have some experience here, Amma, right?
I do, yeah. So I have worked for a mental health and wellbeing organization before, social enterprise before. I think to answer your question, Charlotte, is that it is not one size fits all. And I think it is very much around understanding, is having something set from a global perspective that can be adapted from a regional and country perspective when you're looking at it from a global workplace culture. But also thinking about and understanding what the nuances are in those cultures, because some cultures, like we know, don't even understand or even acknowledge mental health and well-being. But also, if you're privileged enough to live in a country that is you're taken care of by state, and by state I mean welfare, then that's going to be a separate conversation from a country that doesn't even acknowledge that. So I think it really comes, and it comes back to my point when I mentioned earlier about what do you have already in existence to support your people, and is it fit for purpose, and how often do you test it? And it could be something very simple as just making sure those safe spaces are had for people to actually talk about what's happening, for you to then go and find out who are your allies, who actually are the influencers in your organization to make things happen. Because what you don't want to do is throw it back onto the employees and the people. And I think it's just general stuff. And I don't want to simplify things, but in the organization that I worked in previously, well-being check-ins was a really good starting point, but we had to educate people around what that looks and feels like, because a well-being check-in goes beyond just how are you doing today. It goes beyond and this is where it comes down to actually team dynamics and understanding your team. And I also want to address a point really quickly about leadership, because it all ties into each other. Because I think that you start from the point of actually just understanding what is the needs of your people and understanding it from a cultural perspective, and then building from that. But also knowing that you have to review what you're building, whether it's a speak up policy versus actually a DI person. And in my role, I do find a lot of people come to me to talk about things before they even go to HR, because they see me or whoever is in my position as a trusted person to have these initial conversations with from a neutral perspective. So again, how do you create these roles or these positions within your workplace, but also how do you support those people to be able to help those people? Because there's one thing to just have these people and then have no power or authority around it. So in a roundabout way, yes, there are toolkits, there are resources, there's things you can build together that will have the country nuances attached to it. But a lot of it is also skilling up your people to understand and be more self-aware. If you don't do that, and we often hire people on technicality, but not on people skills or interpersonal skills. And it's very important and crucial in the workplace. And that kind of ties into the question that you asked Chisom around leadership not showing it, or if they show it, they come from a place of power and privilege. What we need to understand is it's not a bad thing to come from a place of privilege, so long as you use your power and privilege in the right way, because things will not get done otherwise. And the problem with the workplace is we don't have enough leaders telling us about their issues. Because what happens is you get to a certain position in the organization, and what happens in the leadership space is very, very, is non-transparent. And they're fighting things up there that they don't share with their people. And ultimately what it comes down to is when they're so exacerbated, the communications break down and you have poor decision-making, which is what the people see, but they really don't see how they're trying to hold the business together on a different nature. And if we don't share as leaders our own, let me wrap this up really quickly. The key thing is around leadership attributes. And we need to look at empathy, self-awareness, humility, integrity, as well as really good, savvy, technical, strategic thinking. We need to put it up there as much as we do with everything else. Because if people don't see how we struggle as leaders to try and do what we can do for the best of our people, then all they're going to see is the privilege and the power and nothing else. So it's having to find that integration where we have to respect our leaders, that there have to be some non-transparency because of some of the things that they're deciding, but it ultimately also has to be something around how you work within your reports, your direct reports, and how that trickles down into the organization. Now, we could have a whole session on this, Chisom, and I don't want to take up the platform on it, but that is just a little glimpse of starting point. It has to work both ways. And
Right.
co-workers also have to understand their responsibility about how do I take ownership of my mental health? How do I tell my organization how to help me? And if they don't help me, what are the options available for me? And again, answering very quickly one of the things in the chat. If you have exacerbated everything, you have a duty of care to ask for all the information on you to see what is being said about you. And actually, if it is unlawful or illegal, and you are able to afford legal rights or legal advice, do that. Because one thing a business does not want to do is risk its reputation on something like that, which Sophie bravely has done in her stories. So this all ties into different things. But again, I know we don't all have the option to be able to choose some of the things. But it's actually, I think for me, it's knowing what is available to you, what your rights are, and how you can utilize it to be able to either get a better space in your workplace, or ultimately, as Astrid said, leave.
Right.
Because nothing is worth your mental health and well-being to stay in a place that is not good for you.
Right. So this is segueing. Thank you so much information in that, Amma. And this, I see that Stina has her hand up, and I have a question for you. So hopefully we can merge that just in the interest of time. So we've talked again about leadership, and we've highlighted the crucial role that leadership has in shaping a workplace culture, and setting examples. And we've also talked about how leadership can, it needs to be fluid. You need to know who you're leading, what they respond to. But at the same time, if you're leading a large organization with thousands of people, that is just not realistic. So I do want to talk about leadership style. While there are different leadership styles that work depending on the context, the country, the tradition, and the culture, what is a base foundation for how leaders should show up? I think Amma had shared, some, I think, nice adjectives, around like empathy and integrity, things like this. What else do you think that makes the bare minimum what leaders should have? If you can answer quickly, I'd love that.
Wow, that's a big question to answer quickly, but I'll try. Well, I think bare minimum is basically, I think it's really essential in the world that we live in today, diversity training. I think it's really important that leaders today understand how they're part of the dominant culture at the workplace, and how they influence and get influenced by others. I think by leaders, it's important to know that, when you get more responsibility, new levels creates also new devils. So you're more intrinsically part of the system, you're more intrinsically part of the dominant culture. It's really important to know. And just on merging the different things that we're talking about, like Charlotte was talking about, how would be the right way to stand up and talk for leaders. Sometimes you don't have to do that yourself. Like Amma was talking about, being from a point of privilege, you can do different things as well. You can also support the people, show physical support, being there when people that represent underrepresented groups are talking. So basically, like to give some examples, when trans leaders or people from other or cultural diversity, if you have a top leader actually supporting and actually saying, this is really important for us, listen to her story, this is something that we need to take seriously, that can also be being from a point of privilege and a duty for leaders to take up on that responsibility. So you don't actually need to have experienced all of this yourself and come out with this yourself, but it's really important that you know your role and are supportive of those conversations and of those voices, that so that you empower those voices. Sorry, Chisom, I kind of forgot you. Well, you talked about the leadership styles, right?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm thinking, from my father's generation and stuff, it's been like the masculine, authoritative leadership style that's been really dominant. And I think actually also being a leader and being a leader with a diverse background, or being female, it's really important also to understand how you have that have an influence, how you influence, and that you might not have that deep baritone voice, or being high, a large stature, or other things that sort of can induce power and make people listen to you. So as a woman, you know that you might have not a squeaky voice, but you know, a softer voice that people might not even take that seriously. They talk over you, and you have to find techniques, other techniques to assert influence and to get impact. And knowing that is really important, and understanding and getting you know, feedback, and learning certain tricks and methods of how to navigate in those sessions. And I think it was Kristin Skogenlund, the CEO of Schibsted. She was sharing an experience. She was not prepared for the toxicity and the power games that went on. She was not prepared to meeting actually that people around her probably wanted her to, some might want her to actually fail, and stuff like that, and she wasn't prepared for that at all. So you really need to take care of yourself in these types of situation, and be dead serious about it, because if you don't create a safe space for yourself, no way you're gonna be able to create a safe space for others.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. Astrid, you've been quiet, so I'm going to come to you quickly. Big question, short time to answer. So in terms of leadership, what can organizations and leaders do specifically to combat or mitigate toxic behaviors, reflecting from the perspective of the fact that leaders have a remarkable influence over the workplace atmosphere?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, leaders absolutely set the tone. And bad leadership, as we've explored from many of the answers today, can have this real domino effect. But I think to just try and be really, really specific, organizations where I've seen leadership work is where all the top leaders have continuous training. You know, as a leader, you're never the finished article. You're never someone that is the all-seeing, all-knowing guru. So I think continuous development of leaders to understand things like compassionate leadership and empathy, active listening is also something that's really, really important, I think, for leaders. It's something I've used a lot in leadership development. Avoiding this need to think you have to fix and find solutions to everything, but just to listen and to understand. I think delegation and empowerment are really important themes as well. And then there's the really obvious sort of more concrete examples, such as having very clear anti-harassment policies with training on top of that. There was something that I did at my previous company, although we used Diversify and many other companies to come in and do the training, not just the code of conduct and the reporting systems, but to show that we took this seriously. And that kind of training, anti-harassment, bullying, discrimination, DEI, that should be done often. It should be done well. It should be done by experts, especially if you're bringing in expertise such as anti-racism. And then I think something else that I'll just tack onto that is the importance of having open communication channels, very transparent communication. I know a lot of tech workplaces use Slack. I know not all workplaces can, but that I've seen can be used in a really empowering way for employees. And the last thing I just want to touch on, because I think this is really important, is leaders walking the walk as much as they talk the talk when it comes to work-life balance. You know, I never forget one of the favorite things a previous leader of mine did was she went off on holiday and she sent us all a message saying she would be unreachable on holiday. She didn't say, if there's an emergency, she said, I will be unreachable. I'm taking 2 weeks off now with my family. She was like the VP. And she said, I suggest you do the same. And that for me sets such a gold standard in work-life balance, and a leader who really, showed us the importance of having time with our family, and created the safety for everyone to do the same.
Thanks a lot, Astrid. Amma, I'm going to come to you. I want to talk about leadership on the flip side, right? Because sometimes leaders are at the receiving end of bad behavior. And when you are an underrepresented or underestimated leader, what that also means is sometimes even your direct reports, for lack of a better word, can get away with murder, your murder, for lack of a better word to put it. So my question to you is, what happens when leaders are on the receiving end? And how can this dynamic be addressed within the workplace, especially paying attention to the intersectional identities that come into place? Say, for example, if the leader is Black, do they get believed when they say something happened? If they are queer, if they're disabled, what are some thoughts?
I mean, some thoughts come, I mean, it again comes back to what I was just saying before. I do think when you look at it from an intersectional lens, it's more heightened. And this is where allyship, but I think I posted it on the and I know we'll probably come to it anyway, but I did post it to answer one of the questions on the chat. It's about allyship and leaders knowing that they're not alone. And it can be a very lonely place. And I have often been in spaces where I have been the only Black female sitting in that space. And because I've been hired to do this role, it's kind of like, well, you're already here on tokenism. And so I have to then justify why I'm here. I've come to a point also in my career where I don't do that. If that's what you're expecting, you might as well hire someone else. But I know that I'm also in a position where I can do that. Not everybody can. So I think it's really important. And Astrid, you mentioned training, and I actually hate that word because for me, I'm not saying it's not should be done, but as you know me very well, I hate that word because when it comes to training, what happens then, you have perceived perception of what is to be done, when it's to be done, and it has an end. This doesn't have an end process. If you are a leader in an organization, you are a leader, as I call it, for life, whatever you go to. So it's very much for me around coaching. So allyship is very key around, if I'm on the receiving end as a leader and I'm not being heard, I'm not being given the spaces to say what I'm saying, who can be my allies to help me do this? And how do I continue to be able to voice what I'm feeling in a trusted perspective and environment that will not penalize what I'm doing? But also my work should justify it and show for what I'm doing for myself. So I don't have to justify that in that sense. So it's really important, coming back to the support levels as a leadership perspective. If your leadership is diverse, then you're obviously doing something right. And if you're keeping that diversity in leadership, you're doing something right. So again, asking much more what more can be done to support you, and then actually actively doing it as an ally, to represent whatever marginalized group or community you're trying to do is really important. But also from the sense of self, and I think from my perspective, is outside of my day-to-day job or my workspaces, who else do I have to have my support system? Because ultimately, I need to have that support system in the workplace and also out of the workplace. Enable me to be able to understand sometimes, as it just all in my head, which often isn't, how do I address these situations by asking other people who are going through similar things to me and how they've addressed it. And then at the end of the day, if things are still not going right, the question is, should I be here? Now, I'm not saying leave immediately, but have an exit strategy before you leave. Because like I say, there is nothing worth your mental health and well-being. So I hope I've answered the question, but I think it is very much around it's creating the spaces and finding your allies. And leadership is a very learning place. And the only way people can learn is through pure understanding, coaching. And at that level, your organization should be able to afford coaching. And I actually want to challenge organizations to hire coaches that are not the same. So i.e., not predominantly white, not predominantly from the same community or organization, diverse coaching with diverse organizations and coaches, so that you're able to be challenged in a way that you're not used to probably come from a place of understanding to support, and then give the room and the length and time and space for that person to be able to deliver what they're doing. And good companies do this well, bad companies don't. But, that's, I guess, what I can suggest and offer from perspectives I am coming from. But I definitely think coaching, creating spaces and having support systems in and out the workplace really is helpful.
Right. Thanks a lot for sharing, Amma. I think just to add something to that, from my own experience, I think also just to validate people who might have that, is sometimes within the workplace, it does seem impossible that you have an ally. And that is a reality for so many people. So I think sometimes it's easy to say find allies, but they are not there in some sense. And I do agree that finding a community outside of work goes a long way in, at least feeling like you are not in your head and losing your mind, so to say. Having a community that validates you, having a community where you feel held goes a long way, because as people, essentially, we want to be heard, we want to be seen, we want to be held. Therapy, I said this in the chat, therapy has done wonders for me. And I do know therapy is also a luxury because therapy is expensive, but sometimes even your community, your friends can be a form of therapy for you. And an exit strategy, as Amma said, is top notch. Now, I know we're over time, so I just really want to ask 2 really quick questions, and I want you to do like a fire round. Oftentimes in this conversation, I've seen in the chat, I've seen comments about like, use your union. And this is, I think, always from a Norwegian perspective. So that's also a luxury where you have, and where we have unions. But even so, I also see something about the legal process, the systems policies. But sometimes we know systems policy practices are on paper, right? So my question to everyone, and really quick answers, please, is do you believe that the law is good? Do you think that we have effective laws, unions, systems, and policies to actually protect people from harm? I'm going to start with you, Sophie. Really quick answers.
Yeah, no, it's not. And also, when you get to that point where you want to report something, you're probably very like low on energy, and you have used up everything that you already have on being in the experience that you have with harassment. So it feels kind of hopeless, and it's really difficult. There's a lot of things that I want to report, but I even ask myself the question why, because like they will always have the most money, and they are a lot of wealthy guys, and I'm just me. So no, there's no law that I feel that protects me. But I will not give up, though. That's just but it is difficult, but I will not give up. So yeah.
Thanks a lot, Sophie. Charlotte.
Yeah, also no. I think that there's a huge imbalance of power, and when you are an individual going up against an organization, the amount of money and time available to you is usually disproportionate. I know of people who have successfully done it, but it has been at a huge personal cost and time cost. But I'm very grateful for those people.
We need the trailblazers, so to say. They give permission. Stina?
Well, it's a no for me too. I think laws and systems cannot alone solve the problems. I think they are a baseline, but the proof is in the pudding. They say that culture eats strategy for dinner. And I think we also can say that culture eats systems for dinner. So systems are necessary, but they can also create a false sense of safety if it's not followed up and backed by a safe culture and safe people. If you have sort of a toxic environment or HR or people actually putting the systems in place and controlling the systems, then the systems are basically worthless. So basically, you have to create a safe system in the culture in the organization and work at this on a daily basis. And when people can openly share their mental health issues or other issues at the workplace and be met with empathy and understanding and even praise, then you're at the right path, and systems should support this behavior, not that way around.
Right, thank you. Astrid?
Great answer, Stina. I think one of the things I've reflected on more from the advocacy work I've done is the extent to which I do not encourage or put any pressure on people to report. And in some of the cases I've handled, it's either been police matters, criminal matters, or it's been workplace matters. And I feel that I have a duty, if anything, to prepare them for, if you do happen, it's likely that you will be asked what you were wearing, how much you had to drink. And I feel that it's really important to prepare people about the gaslighting, the triangulation, silent treatment. There's something Sophia and I've talked about is love bombing that can happen from the toxic leaders, the smear campaigns that can happen behind the scene, the sort of silent treatment and gaslighting, the things that make you think you're losing your mind. I think it's really important to be aware that the systems are clearly lacking and clearly insufficient, and oftentimes work against the reportee.
Right, thank you. Emma?
I'm knowing a toxic environment in the workplace, potentially in a better environment. As long as if it's done well and it's been reiterated, yes, to an extent. But I think it has to do with some of the points mentioned here, and accessibility, and actually inclusivity by design of what you're creating.
Right. Thank you all for sharing. Just quickly, what is coming up for me here is that I think oftentimes systems, policies, processes are put in place to cure after things have happened. They are not put in place to prevent. So I do think actions, policies, systems that are measurable can work if they are put in place as preventative rather than as cure. And I think that's where a lot of the disconnect happens. And then with this, I do want to ask you all really quick top tip, one top tip for how to cultivate a workplace, either from a leadership perspective or from a mental health perspective where people feel they can thrive. And while you're going through that, I'm going to invite my colleague Eva to join us in preparation for the Q&A. I'm going to do a round again, so I'm going to start with Sophie.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it answers the question, but my first thought to mind was because when you're used to being at a workplace that is not so good, you get used to more and more. And so the first thing you reacted on after a week or two, you're kind of used to it. And then something else bad happens, and then you get used to that as well. And you just continue working at a bad place and then allowing or tolerating more and more. So I guess when a leader or management shows you who they are, believe them the first time, because it will be difficult to leave after.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Charlotte.
Yeah, there's a quote that I've been trying to remember about bad things growing in the darkness, and so I do think sort of having spaces where you can talk to people, and I like the point around therapy, absolutely, but also having your network of supporters outside of the organization, because corporate gaslighting is something I talk about a lot, and sometimes when you're in the thick of it, you can't work out which way around the world is. So having those people that you can talk to outside of the organization, and I love the idea of exit strategies as well, because we're not all in the position to leave immediately. It's the whole thing of voting with your feet. But if you can have an exit strategy in place, then I think that gives you the confidence in the workplace to sort of compartmentalize what's going on around you and focus on your next steps and doing what's right for you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Stine?
Well, I think a lot of the good things have already been said, and just to support what Charlotte and Astrid just said about the exit strategy, I think it's really important to have. It's I think with Mike Tyson, who said, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And when you get punched in the face, you sort of totally lose the plan. So it's really good then to have an exit plan and to take care of yourself and make sure that your own mental health is prioritized firstly. And then combating on a more general in a more general matter, I think, understanding the root causes, what systems are we all part of, understanding all the dynamics that goes on around us, and not just thinking binary, like bad or good, understand that you too can be a part of the system, and that power can corrupt, and also fear can corrupt what you do. And so being space makers for safe spaces for others, but also 100% for yourself. Take that dead seriously. And if you can't afford therapy, I can also recommend meditation. Make sure that you take time out every day just for yourself, just to listen out yourself, and not just listening to all the buzz going on, but who are you? What's your anchor? That would be a personal advice. And also engaging, like we're all doing today, engaging in this discussion. I think it was Sophia that said, you know, that listening in on a conversation that was where there was no victim blaming. That was I just marked, you know, that was when you really felt safe and felt like, you know, that you could come out. So creating spaces actually brings progress. And thank you, Diversify, for doing that and creating these spaces for everyone, for participating and empowering bold voices.
Thank you all. Thank you all for contributing to it. Amma.
Yeah, echoing everything that's said, I think the important thing is self-awareness, how that perceives for you and amongst how you interact with others. Your health is number one. So again, thinking about yourself in that space, understanding what triggers you and why. Coming back to root cause, as Stein says, I think from an organizational perspective, it's again looking at what you already have and is it fit for purpose, and recreating if needs to. And finally, therapy, yes, may be expensive, but I also know that there's some organizations that offer it for free. And if your organization has an EAP, which is an employee assistance program or something to the likes of that, you should have some free counseling sessions attached to that. So again, there's something around finding out the information for yourself so that you know how to equip yourself to get what you need to get to. And if that doesn't work, your exit strategy is in play.
Knowledge is power. Astrid.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it really, really simple. This is something I say a lot to my mentees, and it's this: you deserve a job that allows you to sleep peacefully at night. That's it.
Thank you so much to each and every one of you for your contributions. And now I'd like to pass the torch to Eva. I know we have a lot of really great questions, so I'm going to let you jump in. Thanks, Eva. Hi.
Thank you, Chisom. Bye. Yes, it's been such a great session so far. I guess we have some time for some questions. So the first question that was posted in the chat was to Sophia. Was there someone who helped you to get courage to speak, or how did you get to that place being able to stand up for yourself? If you'd like to share, Sophia.
Yeah, I did some mental training. I attended a course in mental training that was really helpful, and I learned some new techniques that I still use today. But I was also very aware that my mental health was not good, and I was aware of what had happened to me, and how that was affecting how I could deliver work and be a good colleague. So I was aware I was not on top, and it was annoying that I had to I didn't choose this, and now I have to pick up the pieces and fix things. So that's why I went to the mental training first as a quick fix, and then continuing with a psychiatrist that I got through work. And then when I attended at Oslo Innovation Week, I was attending the panel there or I listened to you. And then it was the first time I was in a room full of other people that was talking about harassment, bullying, and toxic workplaces. And there's a big difference of questioning and asking questions. And I've experienced that over the last months, how people ask different questions and how it makes you feel. And the way being in that room made me feel I just knew that I had to share my story. I had no plan for how to and why. I just knew that what I experienced was wrong. I don't want anyone else to experience it. Of course, that will happen, but at least I can start by sharing. yeah, and then because I was in the lucky position where I was in a room with others and how that made me feel when it was a safe space, maybe I can create or contribute to creating a safe space.
Eva, may I also quickly add, so this event that Sophie was talking about was the Diversify Nordic Summit that we had last year. And last year, Astrid came up to us some months before the summit and said, hey, I really think we should put sexual harassment on the agenda. It wasn't something we had previously thought about. And because we know that it's something that needs to be handled with enormous amount of care. And so we entrusted Astrid with that particular panel discussion, and she joined us in co-creating it. And I think for me, just reflecting on how actions like this have a ripple effect, you know, not knowing that this would give or provide in any sense some type of courage to Sophie, but also for Astrid, like taking this on because she had to front that entire thing. So just wanted to acknowledge Astrid as well for what she did in the situation.
Yeah, and I think that it was talked about previously that having another community than just your coworkers, because you will be in a place where it's a echo chamber. Is that a thing in English also? Yeah. So just being able to talk to others in the same industry business that had other opinions, not the same that I've always heard again and again, that also made me, or it opened my mind a bit more to that there's probably other beliefs and reflections around my story than just I'm annoying for sharing. So yeah, that was really helpful.
Thank you, Sophia. And thank you, Chisom. It was like, I was looking for you. I wanted to put you back because I could just hear your voice, but I couldn't find you. Okay. Now we'll go to the next question. So this is the question for all. What are your thoughts on how can cultural differences influence perceptions and manifestations of toxicity in a workplace? Who would like to contribute here?
Can you ask the question? Can you just repeat the question again, please, Eva?
Yes, of course, Charlotte. So what do you think on how can cultural differences influence perceptions and manifestations of toxicity in a workplace?
I can jump in because it's something that I hear about a lot. Again, working in an organization with multiple different nationalities and cultures, it's important. It's important that we understand cultural differences. There's, some really interesting research that's been done on it, but I am always wary when people use it as an excuse. And I've heard that quite a lot. Oh, I'm not being rude, I'm just X. And it's like, well, okay, if you know that your way of communicating from your culture comes across in a certain way, but you know that the majority of people you're working from are not from that culture, at what point are you using that as an excuse, and at what point is it a valid thing? I totally agree that we need to have better cultural awareness when we are working across borders, but I've also seen it from dominant groups being used as an excuse of like, oh, don't be offended, it's just the way we are. And I think that's quite toxic.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly add to that, Charlotte. I think that there is definitely something around understanding cultural nuances and being culturally intelligent, and understand, especially if you work in a global organization. But then this ties down to, again, expected behavior and how you tie it back to your values as an organization and what that means for you, but also ultimately how you tie it down to your group dynamic and what that means for you. And often we get into these places where we don't revisit how we expect to communicate, or we don't revisit how we expect to work together, especially when you're doing cross collaborations, cross country, cross region. And I think as a starting point, and a point that always needs to be revised, is how are we going to work and how are we going to communicate with each other? And if we have conflict, how are we going to resolve that? And try and involve people in it as sooner than later, to Chisom's point about prevention better than cure. And I think that this is something that has to be practiced and also learnt, because it's something that also just gets taken for granted. So I do think that if you're having a multi-dimensional organization with cultures, It's revisiting, how do you work as a team? How do you work in your projects? How do you work just even on a basic conversation? And how do you have that self-awareness of learning for yourself to understand the nuances, and how do you, again, address that in communication? Say, X made me feel like this, and this is how I would prefer to be, rather than say, you, because sometimes to the Stein's response around the blame game, if you say that, people get defensive. And this is about the calling in and calling out, and at what dimensions do you call in from a perspective of learning and understanding to when you call in, because actually that's derogatory and it needs discipline. And there has to be better understandings and a simpler way for people to know how to take that and use it in the different situations. Not easy, I know, but that is something I wanted to add.
Thanks, Amma. And there's a question that I would like to follow this, what you were talking about. How do race, gender, and other intersectional identities affect the outcome of reporting toxic behavior in the workplace? And who is believed more often? Who wants to contribute to this?
I can say something, start off. I think it's important to recognize that, understand what's the dominant culture in an organization, and understand how the dominant culture is actually the ones that are defining the narrative. And so the underrepresented groups do not get to define the narrative. And I think, myself, growing up in Norway, have the dominant culture, but I'm thinking of myself as a very cultural savvy and understand. But actually, the more diversity training I get, the more I understand that I don't really understand. So I think being very humble and actually reaching out to others that experience that are underrepresented groups, to give them a voice, to hear them out, but not only that, actually make their voices and their perspective come out in actual policies and actual behavior and actually change at the organization, because that's the only way that they're going to feel empowered, that their voice is actually going to matter. It's really important that you make those voices matter. For instance, I got as a diversity leader, I got questions on what do we do about celebrating Id or different types of cultural heritage markings, and I was I myself is not very knowledgeable about these things, but then actually having employees that are Muslims to come out and say, what is it that we should do in order for you to feel safe, in order for you to feel celebrated, in order for you to feel like this is really amazing and is something that we all can learn about, and actually having those people actually getting to influence the culture on the in the organization. Also, another thing from a personal, being totally personal here, me, I've grown up in a completely Norwegian environment. My mother is Black, my father is white, and I always identified as, I wouldn't say a white person, but just as a Norwegian person. I never really identified as anything else. And actually, now reflecting on the fact that actually my appearance has always been sort of invisible, it's not something that I've seen reflected in books and other things. And it makes me aware that when I am to seek diversity, I shouldn't be seek anyone that looks differently than myself, because that would be like, maybe like my father, who is like white males is like my father. That's basically who I'm surrounded. So basically, when I seek different perspective, I need to seek people that looks like me, that ask probably like women with color. That's basically what I'm doing now to actually increase that awareness. So it's you have the hidden diversity, and you have the visible diversity as well. And I think it's really important to take into account and to understand yourself and your own perspective.
Thank you, Stina. Yes,
But
Amma.
can I just quickly add, Stan? I think
Yes.
that to her point, I absolutely agree. But again, when you break it down according to country, region, it will look and feel different. So what will happen in the global north, where the majority might be Caucasian, and that might be different when you apply the intersectional lenses, will look very different, for example, in Latin America, Asia, Africa, where there is more things associated with the cultural associations of identity. So you really have to dig deep and get uncomfortable with the comfortableness to make sure that you're getting the exact voices, to make sure that you're doing the right things for the right people, because it's not it's not a one size fits all. So even when we look at it from the scope of high level gender, whatever it is, that in itself will look different in according to, if you're a global organization, what that looks like.
Thank you, Amma. Oh, yes, please, Sophia.
Yeah. Being uncomfortable, and if you dare to be uncomfortable as a leader, you're probably on the right track of something, I guess. Instead of just trying to have a report system or a new way or a new system and you think it will fix it, but it will not. And as you said, it's not preventing anything from happening. So I wish more leaders would dare to be uncomfortable, have uncomfortable conversations, and not pointing fingers at problems, maybe look at themselves as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. I guess we have 4 minutes, and I see a question here that maybe someone can give like a quick advice. How can I know if I witnessed or heard, for example, sexual harassment made to others, not to me, and what would be the best action I can take?
Well, it's important to know, at least in Norway, that you have you need to report if you think you witness or hear something that have happened. You have to report, but of course it's not that simple always. But it's just important that people, at least in Norway, know that they have to do that. But I would personally talk to the person. Maybe just make it easy, like a coffee or something. Not trying to make it a big deal, because then the person would maybe be afraid to share, thinking it will be a huge fuss. And depending on where you work, that's not always so comfortable.
Yeah, and if you're doing it in the workplace, and I think there's also something around, you can still reach out after the fact that it's happened, because sometimes we tend to be like, oh, we've missed the moment. And there's never a missed moment. So I do think reaching out to the person that had been the end receiver of it is important, and showing that you're there to support. But if you're afraid to talk about it within your business or organization, again, take it out to bring it back in, because often we are afraid that if we share something, does it become gossip? Who do you trust? But ultimately, if you speak to someone trusted outside to help understand and unpick, because the fact of the matter that you're alert that it's something wrong goes to show that there might be something wrong, because you won't just think it that, oh, this must be wrong. And like I said, it's a degree of spectrum, right? It's either the thing of like not understanding to actually being oblivious to actually being really, I guess, aggravated. So yeah, I agree with Sophie, and I think it's just always if it's after the event, you can still check in on someone, is what I'm trying to say, and also take it out to bring it back in if you don't trust people within your workplace.
Okay, I guess we've reached the end. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the speakers, Charlotte, Sophia, Stine, Amma, and Astrid. It's always great to see some of you who I know, and great to see to meet some of you who I don't know from before. Also, thanks to all of the participants that joined us today in such a big number and from all over the world. It's always great to have you with us every month, every Tuesday. So also check us out for June. Yes, and thank you all. It was a great conversation, and I'm sure that everybody's going with a lot of learning.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.